Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this edition of Living Power, your online Bible study. My name is Shannon Mullins, and if you are just joining us, I would love to welcome you to the group. We've had a couple people over the last couple of days join us, and if this is your first Bible study, let me welcome you. We're very glad that you're with us. We are almost completing Genesis. If you can believe it, tomorrow will be our last day in the book of Genesis. And we had a real rich reading over the last couple of days. So I wanted to just kind of recap as we get started today a couple things that we saw happen in the life of Joseph. Now, Joseph is 17 years old when he first has these dreams, and we see that he is the favorite of his father. His father, Jacob, gives him a coat, and that is the coat of many colors that you might have heard about in Sunday school. We see that his brothers have sold him into slavery. They are just so super jealous of him. And he happened to tell them about a dream that he had that just incited their anger even more. And in this dream, they all bowed down to him twice. And we'll see later on that this actually does come to pass. But of course, at this point, the brothers think he's just pompous and arrogant, and they want to get rid of him. So he ends up being taken by Ishmaelite traders and sold to Potiphar, who is a high-ranking official in Egypt, in Pharaoh's land. And so he lives there for many years, and his Potiphar's wife actually accuses him of doing something that he absolutely did not do, and he ended up in prison. Well, God is using all of these events in his life to get him to some place. And he eventually rises to be the second most powerful man in the world because he interprets dreams of the cupbearer and one other person in the prison. And eventually Pharaoh hears about him. Pharaoh has a dream and gets him out of prison, and Jacob tells him what his dream means. And notice that he gives credit to God as he's doing this. And his dream means that there will be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. So Pharaoh soon sees that Joseph is a wise man, and he also has a gift of administration. And he ends up giving him his seal and making him the most powerful man in Egypt except for Pharaoh. And we notice that famine does come, and this is where we begin our reading today on January 16th. So the Bible verse for today that I've chosen comes from Genesis 45:5. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. And in this story, I just love the story of Joseph because it just reminds us so perfectly that God is in control of all of our circumstances. He's ordaining these circumstances, these things that are coming to our life. And if we work with him, as Joseph did, if we work with him, God will make everything okay in the end. So I want you to notice that there's a prophecy that's about to come true. And you remember when God told Abraham many, many lessons ago, it's back in Genesis 15, verse 13. God says, your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land where they will be slaves for 400 years. And this is back on page 18 in your Bible. This prophecy is about to come true as the family moves into Egypt, and we'll see that they eventually do become slaves for 400 years. So we also see that Judah, one of the sons of Jacob, which is the tribe that Jesus eventually comes from. Jesus comes from the line of Judah, does something miraculous, and he steps up in leadership. Remember, he played a part in selling his brother Joseph to these traders to begin with. But here he is, in today's reading, he is telling his father, I will personally guarantee his safety, the safety of Benjamin. If we go back, I will personally guarantee his safety. And this is such a huge turnaround for Judah. But it's very significant, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. Now, as the brothers find themselves before Joseph in our reading today, Joseph is in a place of power. We see he can speak 2 languages. He has a wife, and he is very settled in Egypt. Remember, he was 17 when he was sold into slavery. He is now about 39, possibly 40 years old. Benjamin, his brother, is about 30 years old at this point. So it has been many years. He hasn't seen his father in this whole time. He hasn't seen his brothers this whole time. So you can imagine the surprise when the brothers appear before him and they are asking for grain. He recognizes them right away, but they don't recognize him. Now, it's probably because he's in the Egyptian garb. He probably has some sort of headdress on. He's certainly in Egyptian clothing. He's a very powerful man. This is the last place his brothers expect to find him. And before I forget, there is a movie about Joseph's life that I have really enjoyed watching. You have to sometimes be careful with the Hollywood movies because sometimes they are right on being accurate biblically and sometimes they're a little bit off. But this is a movie you can find on Netflix. It's with Ben Kingsley and it's a good one. It's called The Bible Collection, Joseph. So if you're interested in watching this, just to kind of learn more about this story, it's a great movie to watch. So the tests that Joseph brings upon his brothers, there are really 2 tests here. And the reason for the test is because he wants to determine if their hearts have changed and if they are remorseful for what they did to him. And he does this by seeing how they treat his brother Benjamin. If Benjamin's life was in danger, what would they do? Would they give him up like they gave him up many years ago, or would they stand in and protect him? So we see he puts silver in their sacks. He puts his silver cup in Benjamin's pack. And the sudden threat, it says in the Bible, to Benjamin's life was a thrust in their hearts. And so Joseph is very happy to see that their hearts truly have changed here. What was the brothers' response when they thought that their brother's life was in danger? It says they tore their clothes in grief, and it was the same response that they caused Joseph to do before. So there's a bit of irony there. In Genesis 44, verse 14, we see Joseph's dream being fulfilled as they bow down before him. And Judah's impassioned plea before Joseph says something like this. Judah says, I must stay and be his slave. Judah is interceding here for Benjamin. And he says, I cannot go back to my father. I made a guarantee to bring my brother back. Let me stay here as your slave. I couldn't bear it if he were harmed. And Joseph wept. It says the whole household of Egypt could hear this, that he was weeping so much in anguish. And we see that he instructs the family after they are reconciled, you must move here and you must come here and live with me here in Egypt. Now from this lesson today, I think we can pull out 3 applications. The first thing comes from Judah's plea as we begin to see him as an intercessor. This speech of Judah is one of the greatest speeches in all of the world's literature. And it revealed him as a proper ancestor of Jesus who would become known as the suffering servant. Here we see Judah freely offering himself up as a ransom for his brothers. Secondly, we come to understand that the certainty of God's will, not man's, but the certainty of God's will and his sovereignty is controlling our reality in all of our situations. So can you perceive the hand of God in your circumstances? I know certainly it's easier sometimes than others. But this story, perhaps it can make us just a little bit more able to forgive. And perhaps it can bring us just a little bit more peace that things will all work out in the end. And thirdly, I believe we can take away from this lesson as Joseph assures his brothers, as he says, God has sent me ahead. Surely this was a recent conclusion for him. When he was in prison, you remember he called out to God. Surely he wondered why all of these things were happening to him. But his faith kept him going for these many, many years. And now looking back, he could see God's hand in his life through all of these circumstances. You know, I wonder, can we see the sovereignty of God working in our life through our present circumstances? And we're remembered here that God doesn't forget his own. So I hope this is a blessing to you today. I know it certainly has been to me, that we can trust God through all things. All we have to do is just rely on him, because he is always in control. Well, I hope you enjoyed this lesson today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. See you then.